And whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a marketing professional, or simply fascinated by the art of branding, you're in for a real treat. So let's waste no time and jump right in. David, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the very, very first episode of Branding Like a Boss. We're so thrilled that you're here. And as our very first guest to speak on this program, I know that you're going to set the benchmark for all of the episodes to come. And you need no introduction at all. But just in case there are listeners who are not really familiar with you and that you've written 2 books on cannabis branding and also the language around cannabis, can you please share your background with us?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Angela. First of all, it's great to be with you and congratulations on your new show. I think that's fantastic. And I just want to thank you and Jeff and Bill, the Beard Bros, for supporting me and inviting me onto the first episode. So thank you for that. Yeah, it's exciting. First show. Hopefully we'll keep the bar high, raise the bar high, and set the tone for things to come. So I'm excited about that. Well, I've been in the cannabis industry for 12 years, but really my branding and marketing background go deeper than that, obviously. For many years, I had owned an art gallery in New York City, so I'm all about art and design and lifestyle. Then I went and got my MBA and came out and spent many years. If I say the number of years, then people start to add them up and realize how old I am. So I spent many years serving American Express, MasterCard, Pepsi, and Microsoft. Was recruited out to Seattle from New York City in 2006 to work at Microsoft. And then 6 years later, when the I-502 law passed here, which is the adult use law, I saw most of my friends leaving Microsoft and Starbucks and Amazon and Boeing to get into the industry. And so I decided to do the same. So it's been 12 years now, 12 really long years, because I think everybody in the industry knows how long a day or a year is in the cannabis industry. But basically consulted initially, then went to work at Dope Magazine for 4 years, then over to Evergreen Herbal, which depending on the month is in the top 3 processors here in Washington State, where I developed a number of brands and then licensed them out to other states. And then finally, the last few years has been working for myself at Branding Bud Consulting Group and helping other brands in the space either develop brands, market brands, or license into other states. So that's pretty much me.
Didn't you also have a very successful Clubhouse series as well during the pandemic?
Well, during the pandemic, I think everybody had a successful Clubhouse series. Yeah, spent a lot of time on Clubhouse, hours and hours and hours when I really think about it. But met a lot of great people, and in a weird way, outside of the pandemic itself, that was kind of a special time in some ways. It was unique.
Well, that certainly gave you a really wonderful national, international audience, right? And gave you that sort of perspective on the industry in ways that we weren't necessarily able to reach from our part of the universe sometimes when we're doing real life events.
Yeah, and so that was super helpful. It was really funny actually to come back to MJ Biz after the pandemic and meet in person all the people that I had met online. Same thing with my book. When I came out with Branding Bud, the Commercialization of Cannabis, there were lots of people, which to my surprise went for 9 months as an Amazon bestseller. So I met a lot of people through that as well. Yeah, it's amazing the reach and the connections you can have and make online, and how those relationships become really special once you meet in person and really solidify that connection.
Absolutely. And so as you're going to these different events, you're obviously seeing a multitude of perspectives across our industry. And you're one of the very few people that I know who's able to have that national perspective, with that being brand agnostic as well. So what are some of the things that stand out to you in terms of the current state of our cannabis industry across the US?
Well, I think the first things, which I'll just call out, but don't really want to dive into them, I think is rescheduling in the Farm Bill. I think those, just touch upon everything we do and sort of can potentially influence everything we do. I have my thoughts on that, although I'm trying to really keep my thoughts on those things, a little closer, just because everybody's really pontificating about what rescheduling means or what the Farm Bill means. And the truth is, I don't necessarily know what it means. So I'd just wait and sort of play it by ear. But
Well, that's so much for all of us, just in terms of what does it mean? How do we need to pivot this time, since we're also adept at pivoting?
yeah, we are. That's for sure. The one thing that nobody really talks about is is if 280E goes away. See, here I am. I'm jumping into it. If 280E goes away, who's paying the taxes, right? And if the taxes aren't going into the government's coffers, and that money isn't being made, then what does that do for the industry? One of the reasons why our industry was created, because all of a sudden we were going to generate taxes. So it's just interesting to sort of see who the winners are, who the losers are. In this case, if there's fewer taxes, perhaps the public is a loser. Perhaps the government is a loser, and we know that the government doesn't lose too often. They do what they need to do to make things right for them. So it's just interesting. I'm really curious to sort of see what will happen and how this will all shake out.
Well, you and me both, and we certainly hope that it's not the patients and the consumers who are going to be losing, because we want safe access, we want great quality products. And if there's something that we do know across the country and still want to hear about some of the similarities and differences, is that first mover advantage isn't always a for sure within the cannabis industry. Are you seeing any of the key challenges with first movers or with brands as they're coming out as fast followers across the country, across different states?
Well, like I said, I think we're all, every brand, whether they're an MSO or an individual mom and pop, it's hard right now, right? So that's super hard. From a national perspective, as we look across different states and as we look across companies that are serving those different states, I mean, there's so many things. There's moving targets, there's rules and regulations, there's compliance, there's gray markets, right? There's so many things that are taking place. As I was looking through some of the questions you posed, what dawned on me is that what's similar are the differences and what's different are the similarities. It's just really interesting to sort of understand the space that the brands are in right now, and really how do they leverage what it is they've created from one state into another. But one thing you mentioned about being a leader or being first to market or first to develop a product, having worked for MasterCard, Pepsi, and Microsoft. Those are three really big number twos. And while I was there, I learned a lot about being number two. And there's a lot to be said for being number two and not being number one. Number one is the bushwhacker. Number one is the one that goes out and takes a lot of energy to basically create something new or to convince people or to change minds. But number two, follows right through and really rides the coattails of number one. So there's a lot to be said for being number two. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I've seen that across different states as well, where a brand that's been successful in one state and then transitions to creating a completely separate market in a different state, trying to import in a way or transition its core values, and also finding its community and its audience in an authentic way is certainly an area of branding and marketing that we continue to be challenged and also excited by.
Yeah, and as much as there's opportunities, there's also pitfalls. So it's great for a brand to talk about their their success in a market and how that success can telescope into other markets, but it's not always the case. In the cannabis space, there's different dosing from one state to another. There's different packaging requirements from one state to another. There's certain form factors allowed in some states and not in others. So it just really depends, it really depends on each manufacturer or processor's or cultivator's situation and where they are and where they're moving to.
So should brands look for the same type of audience or the same type of consumer when they navigate from one market to another?
That's a great question. I always tell my clients, I always ask my clients, who are your customers?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer I typically get is everyone. And then I remind them that no, it's not. It's at least 21 plus and all the other things that come into play. The second question I ask is, okay, if you don't know who your customer is, who do you want it to be? And
Yep.
so, I think there's lots of information out there that, can help us support whether they're brand personas or demographics or ethnographics or, geographics or all the things that basically, take us to a place where we can better understand who our current clients are and then who we want to appeal to. And, that just might be redirecting or really adding more value to the customers you really want to tag into.
Yeah, that's my first question as well. Who are we designing for? If you don't know who you're designing for, it's very challenging to create a relevant product and also a relevant marketing strategy that we hope is going to be successful. And as we know, marketing dollars are hard to find in our industry. So when we're thinking about different types of consumer segments, you brought up the term personas and psychographics and demographics. Just for a small split second, maybe share with the audience what you mean by persona, because you and I know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, a persona is basically, an avatar, if you will, or an icon, if you will, of who you're trying to appeal to. What excites them? What are their interests? How do you speak to them? How do you message to them? What tone do you use? And basically one of the things that I do, I have a model which is basically concentric circles. And in the core, in the center, there's what I call the Canna core. And that's all of us, people in the industry, people that consume probably on a daily basis. The second ring further out is the Canna comfortable. They're probably our partners, our spouses, our friends, people that are pro-cannabis, but also, and might consume from time to time, but maybe not as much as the core. And then we get to the Canna curious. Those are the folks that are still trying to work out the difference between CBD and THC. And then we get to the Canna neutral, who really have no feeling on it. And then finally the Canna contra. And so I always use this model to basically lay things out in terms of who are we talking to. And then I always jump into the swimming pool analogy. The swimming pool analogy is like, hey, come join me in the pool. And when somebody says, oh no, it's too shallow, I want to dive, you say, hey, well, meet me in the deep end of the pool, right? It's deeper there, you can dive there. Or the person that says, the water's too cold, offer them a wetsuit, right? Or the pool's too shallow. I did that side. Or, the pool's too deep, come on the shallow side. But it's like, how do we speak to each of these different segments to get them to join us in the pool? And the answer is it's very different depending on what their needs are and what they're looking to do and how they feel about swimming and jumping in a pool. So
I love that. I love that analogy because we're really talking about what people's expectations, their needs, their current behaviors, and as a brand, how do we adjust for that within our marketing strategies? Which brings me to the next question around, if we've effectively identified our core audience and our concentric circles of audiences and put together a strategy of how to attract them, what are some of the cannabis brands that you feel have effectively connected with their communities within their markets? So I guess I'm going to make an assumption that you infuse from the core and hopefully it ripples out, right?
Yes, depending on that. I mean, I'll just take you through quickly. One of the models I use for helping brands with a strategy. So there are typically four pillars to creating a meaningful brand. The first one starts with, as we just said, who's your customer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Once we know who the customer is, demographics, ethnographics, where they live, what affects their daily life, we can start to move in and make some assumptions on their lifestyle.
Yep.
And once we better understand their lifestyle, we start to get into their need states, their rituals, their habits, so on and so forth. And probably first and foremost, when they consume, are they indiscreet or discreet, which will then start to dig down into form factors, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if they don't want to smell like weed, then they're most likely, or if they're a discreet consumer and don't want to smell like weed, they're more likely to drink a beverage or consume an edible or a tincture or a transdermal slip or
Mm-hmm.
transdermal patch and sublingual slip, right? So then we could start to get to the form factor based on their lifestyle. From the form factor, we can then talk about bioavailability and uptake and dosing and all the other things that really come into play. And then finally, the outer package, which is the brand name, which is the brand archetype, which I call them. And in my first book, I have 14 cannabis brand archetypes. So let's just say it's celebrity, or it's a gender-based, or it's a nostalgic-based brand, or a foodie-based brand. That's where we could start to really double down and create brands that speak to them. So when we finally develop this brand, we've really thought through who's the customer, what are they looking for, what do they want, what's their need state, what's their rituals. Another thing I always throw out is it an additive brand or is it a subtractive brand? And people say, what does that mean?
Yes. What does that mean?
Well, an additive cannabis brand is something, it's cannabis that you consume to enhance an experience, and your mind state is great. Now I'm going for a walk, or now I'm about to play music, or I'm about to paint a painting. I'm consuming to enhance my experience. On the other side of that is subtractive, which is people consuming cannabis to alleviate pain or to put them to sleep. And your mindset is completely different. Think about taking an Advil or a Tylenol versus, let's say, having a drink. So one is
Mm-hmm.
more about, enhancing, the other is about alleviating. And again, those are two completely different mindsets. So we need to think about, adult use consumers. Are they patients? Are they not patients? How do they consume? When do they consume? Under what circumstances? And all of that rolls up into finally that outer packaging of the brand archetype. And then finally, we get to a meaningful brand that speaks to a consumer across all levels of their desires and their rituals, their habits, and finally their consumption.
Amazing. What are some of the brands that have effectively connected with their audience in the way that you've just expressed?
Well, I have a favorite brand out of Vermont right now, which is called Fish Whistle. And here's what's so great about Fish Whistle. They're all about fly fishing people. I want to say fisherman, but fisher people. Uh, so what's so great about them? And I'm not even a fly fisher person, but what I love about it is, first thing is, Fish Whistle is a slang term used by fisher people, which is basically a joint or a pre-roll. So when someone says, hey, do you have that fish whistle? All the fishing people know what they're speaking about. So immediately there's a word, and words, and we'll talk about words a little bit later, but words are really important because words do two things. They either create community or they marginalize communities. And
Yes.
so in this case, if someone knows what a fish whistle is, they're on the in, right? So exactly, Chris from Vermont, the owner of Fish Whistle, and what's so cool about it is Chris knows, one, how to speak the language of his customers. He knows where his customers are on the weekends they're fly fishing. He knows the events that they're going to, which are the competitions. He sells his merch line in Cabela's and Bass Pro Shops and all of the other bait and tackle shops. So he's already speaking a certain language to a subsegment that happens to appreciate or consume cannabis. And so that to me is like, the perfect brand, because it starts off by saying, hey, who are your customers? Well, we know who our customers are. We know where they are. We know how to speak to them. We know how to show up next to them. They are our friends. They are our family. They are our community. And there's very few cannabis brands that have done that, or have connected, just beyond being a cannabis brand, or just beyond offering a product. This is really tying into one's lifestyle. And the truth is, the brands that are most successful and have the most loyal followers are the ones that have really tied into a consumer's love or lifestyle or rituals, or better yet, habits, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when we were baby marketers way, way, way back when, we were always taught, capture that consumer insight, whatever it is, whether it's a challenge or it's a need, or it's an unmet need, or it's just a lifestyle choice. Capture that consumer insight and build on top of it, with your product marketing, with your brand marketing, and truly be relevant and resonate. So it sounds like, with Fish Whistle, they just really resonated with a core audience that feel that they're being spoken to in a way that is relevant and resonates with them.
Right, absolutely. And that's what it's all about. If you can speak to consumers in a way that they speak to their communities. In fact, if you could embed yourself in their communities, that's true authenticity.
Yeah, I agree with that. And do you think that this type of a campaign, it sounds like it's not just about events, it's really about grassroots, it's really about that community that already is existing. So they're basically tapping into an existing community and finding their voice and their resonance. We also hear that with marketing, a lot of people talk about brands that have very large budgets, like, oh, so-and-so brand has this gigantic marketing team and a big budget, and therefore they're able to have these next level events and ongoing activities and ad budgets. How do you see the impact of that in terms of what's worked out and whether it really matters?
Well, I mean, if the question is, do big budgets matter? I would say no, as long as you have a big budget. Um, so, the truth is, big budgets make things happen easier. But so does authenticity and connecting to a community. So I would say this, it's always nice to have a big budget. It's always nice to have more than you need, just because that's how life is. But the truth is, if we're connected to a community, we could probably get away with things, that others couldn't. Really, the truth is, if you're not connected to a community, you need to buy your way in. And if you need to buy your way in, you need the budget to basically build those relationships.
Yeah.
But if you are in the community, and if you are authentic, and if you are connected, then more often than not, you could find locations to throw events that either people are willing to put up, or they'll give you, the right price to rent the location. Celebrities and influencers within the space are more likely to come to your event and support you if they know you. So I could go down the list, but pretty much, if you're part of the community, as opposed to buying your way in, then, budgets become less important.
I completely agree, because we've seen how poor deployment of marketing funds have hurt a lot of brands. And I always feel that consistency and having a sustainable campaign is more important than large budgets when big splashes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also how you connect with those people. If it's is it relational or is it transactional, right? And that's really important too. I think most business people think about transactions, And but I think our industry and just the way it's come on board, and that the fact that there are so many passionate people about this,
Yep.
it's more relational.
I completely agree. That relationship, your network, who you feel connected to are so much more important than something that's just shiny and bright and splashy. Budgets, as you said, they matter, but more importantly, does it come across in a way that truly connects? And is it going to be a sustainable campaign that's going to help you build over time rather than just having one or two offs? Let's pivot and start talking about your books, because I've read your first book, Branding Bud, and I just had purchased your second book, and I really admire you for the second book and the effort that you're putting into it in terms of changing the vernacular of the language of cannabis, because we all have our own language. And as you're talking about the consumers who are already, daily consumption in terms of their habits, but then we also have a very, very, very wide potential market of people who could really benefit from the benefits of cannabis, but then there's this ongoing stigma. How does language play into keeping those people out because they either feel it's wrong or that it's not for them? So how does language matter in all of this? And tell us about the genesis of your premise and why you wrote this book, the second one.
Well, the second one I wrote was really, there was an event here in Washington. I live in Seattle. I was in the Capitol at Olympia, in Olympia, and there was a conversation around cannabis, and at the end, and I was fairly verbal during the conversation. At the end, a Washington State politician came over to me and said, "You don't use marijuana, do you? Because you don't look like you do." And I said, "No, I don't actually." And he seemed like relieved, like, okay, I was somebody normal he could talk to. And then I said, "I consume cannabis." And after his head stopped spinning on his shoulders, I realized that we kind of got into it. And he said, "Well, what's the difference between use marijuana versus consume cannabis?" And so I kind of went off and I said, well, use is a slippery slope, right? Use goes into abuse, and then the next thing we're back to the gateway drug conversation.
Yep.
But we are all consumers, every one of us, and we consume every day, and we make choices about what we purchase and what we put in our body. And so it's a thoughtful process. We think about the value. We think about how much are we paying for this. We think about the ingredients. We think about all these different things. So to me, it just makes more sense to use the word consume versus use. I think everybody certainly listening here knows the difference between cannabis and marijuana.
Yep.
But the more I thought about this, the more I thought about, wow, there's so many words that the industry uses either incorrectly or has misappropriated words. So, for example, recreational versus adult use. Now, to me, I have a 14-year-old son. He comes home from school every day and he recreates, and I sure as hell hope he's not smoking weed after school, right? So, adult use just really implies, again, there's an age limit, there's responsibility, there's all these other things that sort of tie into the word adult use versus recreational. On top of that, there's lots of people that don't use cannabis or don't consume cannabis for recreational purposes. They are truly patients and they really need, the plant to help them with
Feel better.
yeah,
And
with
even function. Yes.
exactly. So to call it recreational isn't really right in my mind. Further, strain versus cultivar. Strains have everything to do with bacteria and viruses and nothing to do with botany or horticulture. So cultivar is the right word. Variety is what happens in nature. Cultivated variety, which is where cultivar comes from, is when humans change things, which is the case when it comes to cannabis. And strains really just don't even fall into the conversation, but yet in our industry they do. And I could keep on going on, but there were so many different words and so many different opportunities that I felt we were either misleading people, fostering stereotypes, or not allowing for what we're really trying to do, which is we want acceptance of the plant. We want the plant normalized. As we see the laws changing both in the United States and around the world, it seems to me that if we want to build bridges with all the folks we've been trying to convert or convince, we need to speak their language. And coming back to why language is so important is, I was a professional skateboarder. If I showed up to the skateboard park and I didn't speak the language that the other skateboarders were speaking, like, for example, if I didn't say, hey, do an ollie, but I explained, hey, do that trick where you smack the tail of your board on the ground and so the board levitates and, so on and so forth, all the skaters would look at me like, you mean an ollie? And the same thing here in the cannabis world, right? There are so many words and terms that if we were to describe them without using those words, we'd look like an idiot, basically. What we would look like is an outsider. And so words really, again, do two things. They create community.
Yep.
And they show us who's with us and who's on the inside. And then on the outside, it's really about marginalizing, that there are people who use words like stoner, like all the other words, to basically marginalize us and put us in our place. So it seems to me that if we're going to normalize the plant and convert, for lack of a better way of saying it, or convince policymakers, doctors, scientists, politicians, etc., researchers, we need to start using their language. And if we can use their language to convince them, and we have seen there is research that shows if we change our language. I think medical marijuana is a great example, how we went from marijuana to medical cannabis. We've changed these things. So it's important. One thing I just want to throw out is a lot of people have kind of reached back out to me now that the book is out for a month. People have actually said to me, so should we never use the word weed again? Or how do you feel about the word weed or other words? And I want to make it clear, like, I'm not the word police. And by no means do I want to come across as the word police. I use the word weed when I speak to my friends, and I use other words that are of the culture, right? When I'm speaking to the people where it's appropriate to. But I wouldn't go to Olympia or to the state capitol or to other places where I speak and speak in slang and euphemism.
So if we're talking about an inside outside type of perspective, then on the inside it's about belonging and being able to not demonstrate, but be a part of a community that you belong to, which comes with its own language. Absolutely. And then in terms of the outside, then it's about acceptance, right? Mm-hmm. So being accepted in a way that is respectful, that has its place. And then also, I think there's that element of advocacy by using language in its appropriate forms in different scenarios.
Absolutely, because different things mean different people in different contexts, right? Yep. So it's really important. And really, the book at its heart is really know who you're speaking to and understand the language that they use and utilize it, because that's how you build bridges. And I think a great example of this is if I started to speak about gun control and straight up use those two words, gun control, I've probably lost 50% of the audience I'm speaking to already. They've turned off. They don't want to hear about it. They're not interested in it. What comes after that is, okay, how would I open up that conversation? Which in this case, in this example, it's responsible gun ownership, because
Mm-hmm.
whether you're anti or pro gun ownership, who is against responsible gun ownership? Everybody's for it, right? So so we need to just pick our words in the way we can enter a conversation without being shut down before we
Like
even.
climate change.
Exactly. And in today's world, whether it's social media with echo chambers or the political environment, whatever it is, if you start off on the wrong foot, or if you say something that somebody doesn't agree with, you're up shit's creek before you even got started.
That's
So
right. You might get canceled too.
that's right. So it's really important to understand who we're talking to and how we're talking to them, and especially in the cannabis space. It's definitely, there's so many landmines that some we're aware of and some we're not.
Yeah.
And so we just have to be really mindful, and that's really what the books focuses on, is like, hey everybody, we need to grow up a little bit, and we need to sort of mature a little bit, and we need to be mindful of how to get what we're doing to get a little more traction, to get it over over the finish line. And I think those things are important. One other word too is and I always feel um, pulled in different directions with this. I don't use the word medical when it comes to cannabis. I use medicinal, I use
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic, I use wellness,
Mm-hmm.
but medical implies to me, and again, within context, within our country, medical implies that doctors prescribe it, pharmacists distribute it, and insurance covers it. And while I know that there are so many people that have worked for decades on medical marijuana and getting people to accept not only the term but also the concept, for me to kind of shoot it down in a way and say, no, it's not medical. Medical means, the things I just mentioned. The
Yes,
truth is that we have a long way to go before it's medical.
absolutely.
And so, not to take away anything from those activists and those folks that have really pushed for it, but not to use words that also imply like we're finished, we've done what we needed to do, because we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, my hope certainly is that in the not too distant future, that our health insurance will be able to cover the cannabis that we consume for our health and well-being, and part of our wellness regime, so that we can be more wellness focused. And enjoyment is part of wellness as well. So really love the work that you do. Now, before you grow up too fast, I do have one question for you, which is a themed type of question. So if you were a cannabis themed superhero alter ego, what would it be and why?
Well, I've come up with a couple of different ones, but the one I landed, the one I landed on is, my superhero name would be the Green Guardian, and I would have a number of superheroes. One is actually rapid growth. I would have a cannabis plant that could grow rapidly and would be able to either act as a shield or a barrier. It would protect folks that I was hoping to protect. It would also lock up and hold prisoner those folks that I'm trying to thwart, or basically trying to save the others from. And of course, my superhero, outfit. There's a green tight lycra outfit that I'd wear, a cape which is draped over my shoulders, which looks like a cannabis leaf,
Ooh.
which allows me to not fly, but to glide where I need to safely to get from one space to another. And then, of course, my real weapon of choice is that I'm able to exude smoke, cannabis smoke, which will relax all the folks in need or of help, or potentially even put to sleep some of the dangerous folks that I'm dealing with. So
Ooh, I love that stealth mode
yeah, that's
superpower.
my superhero.
I love it.
And of course, there would be a green face mask, which only covers the top part of my face, allowing me to consume without setting myself on fire as well.
And it's so practical as well.
Right.
Oh boy. Thank you so much, David, for being our very first guest on Branding Like a Boss. Now, for the audience, how do we find you? What's the best way of reaching you?
The best way of reaching me is, well, I'm always on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach me there. You can check out my website, which is brandingbud.com. You can find my books on amazon.com. And I also have a podcast as well. So I'm around, and I'm happy to engage. I love what I do on a daily basis. I love the cannabis community. I truly feel like the folks in the cannabis community are some of the best folks I've ever met. You know, everybody fits in their own misfit way, and that's pretty much how I've kind of lived my life. So yeah, I'm super excited to be part of it. I hope we can really move things where we need to in the next few years. And outside of that, I just want to, Angela, thank you again for having me on your first episode. I think it's wonderful. And again, to the Beard Bros, Bill and Jeff, for really supporting folks like us and the industry as well. And we all have to stick together. So let's do it.
Absolutely. I echo everything you've just said in terms of, giving us the opportunity to bring our experiences, to change the language, to also be of service in this industry that is still in its second inning right now. So thank you to the audience who have participated and watched our very first episode, and watch out and stand by for other announcements for Branding Like a Boss that we're going to have in the future. And we intend to have lots of really great minds like David on the show. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Angela.